Tapes of Trepidation presents the Campfire Sessions. Hello, dear listeners, and welcome back to the Campfire Sessions, here on Tapes of Trepidation. I'm so happy you've come back to join me by the campfire as more creepy stories are shared. Whoa. Did you just feel that? Like a cold breeze just went through my whole body. I guess that's to be expected, as this area is actually known to be haunted. It seemed appropriate since you can't tell scary stories around a campfire without a few ghost stories. This evening, we're delving into 3 spooky ghost stories, starting off with the terrifying story of the head on the mirror. It was already 7:45 p.m., and I was alone in the house because my dad took my mom out on a date. My older sister was still not home, which I found a bit unusual, since she was always home by around 6 or 6:30. My eldest sister wouldn't be home until around 11 or 11:30, since she gets out of work at that time. Since I was alone, I watched a movie while waiting for everyone to come home. I first prepared myself a little dinner so I would have something to eat. I switched on the DVD player and put in a movie. Halfway through it, however, I suddenly got bored, so I switched off the system and read The True Philippine Ghost Stories, a popular horror book in my country, while listening to music with only one earphone in, so I wouldn't have any difficulties hearing anything. My sister arrived a few moments later, and I felt relieved for some reason that there's someone I'm already with. After seeing me on the couch, she asked, "Where's Mom and Dad?" I glanced at her from behind my book and said, "They went out." "Okay. Well, I'll be upstairs if you need me. You wait for Mom and Dad to come home. Clear?" I simply replied, "Okay. I'll be upstairs." "Whatever," I replied. I was sitting on the sofa beside the mirror that reflects the door. Every time I looked in the mirror's direction, I got this weird feeling as if someone is looking back at me. I just shrugged it off, thinking I was becoming paranoid reading too many scary stories and playing too many horror games. It was around 8:05 when strange things began happening. I heard a knock on the door. Maybe Mom and Dad were home already. So I stood up and walked to the front door. When I was several steps away, I heard a loud bang as if someone was forcing themselves into the house. I backed away a few steps from the door and grabbed a broom. I slowly approached the door and quickly opened it, expecting something to jump out at me. But I saw nothing. I stuck my head outside and looked around, but I didn't see or feel anything except the slight gust of wind that slowly brushed against my face. I went inside and closed the door, laughing at myself for being too paranoid. But I swore I heard someone knock. That surely wasn't my imagination. How could my imagination explain that loud bang I just heard? Thinking I'm just really paranoid, I continued reading while listening to my music. After 10 minutes or so, the knocking sounded again. But this time, I had the feeling of being annoyed, and at the same time, fear. The knocking went on for a few more minutes until it finally stopped. I phoned my best friend, who is a bit of a psychic, and told him there's something strange going on, and that I always get a weird feeling whenever I look in the mirror. He asked, "You can feel it too?" After a moment of silence, I asked him, "Feel what?" And after another moment of silence, he told me something that made me feel even more uncomfortable. He told me that when he first visited my house, he saw long strands of hair scattered on the floor by the front door, and a feeling of uneasiness wrapped around him. After hearing this, I told him it wasn't funny. I asked him if he was trying to prank me and stated it was a reasonable attempt to scare me. To which he replied, "No," and then he apologized for scaring me. I told him it's okay, and I'll see him tomorrow before I said goodbye and hung up. I just continued reading, this time hoping nothing interrupts me. I stood up and went to the kitchen for a glass of water, and then went back to the living room. Just as I was about to pick up my book from the coffee table, something caught my eye in the doorway of the kitchen. It seemed like a shadow. I looked at the doorway for a few moments and then called out, "Hey, sis, are you there?" But got nothing as a response. I was trying to get all the weird feelings off me. I couldn't help but look at the mirror every time I got the urge to do so. I tried refusing to look at the mirror a few times, but I couldn't help but look over one last time. And what I saw made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was a human head, partially covered in hair. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was just playing off. I was wrong. It was absolutely real. The feeling became more and more uneasy at every passing moment. I ignored the fact that there was something horrifying right in front of me that will haunt my dreams, while I gathered the courage to look at the mirror again, which is a decision I deeply regret. The face was right in front of the mirror, as if it was trying to get out. The face did something that would traumatize any child. It smiled at me. I saw its pale face with streaks of blood on it. The sight of this horrible entity made me sweat in fear, and then I passed out. I woke up at around 10:30. I heard my mom's voice call out from the front door. I rushed over, tripping like an idiot. When they were inside, I joined them in the kitchen and asked my mom how their date went. My mom said happily, "Oh, it's the best date I've ever had," while looking at my dad, who was smiling at her. A few minutes later, I told her all about what happened. But I haven't told her that the ghost still hasn't left its place. The moment I told my mom about the face in the mirror, the smile she had on her face disappeared and was replaced with a worried expression as she looked at my dad. "What's wrong?" I said. "Oh, nothing. It's just what?" My mom told me that when we moved here, the mirror was already here. She thought the mirror nicely decorated the room and looked good with the furniture, so she decided to keep it instead of selling it. Like how I did, she experienced weird happenings when she was alone, like a shadow lurking around. She just tried to ignore them, hoping it would all go away. A year has passed, but that horrifying experience I had still hasn't left my mind. And about the ghost, whenever I look at the mirror, I can still see the face, never leaving its place. Voice actor and friend of the show, Loggerhead, joins us by the campfire to share a rather odd story of a man getting lost in the woods of his town and experiencing a strange event.
Around 2 months ago, I was invited via a letter to the funeral of a relative I was only vaguely aware of. It's common in my city to travel by walking or biking. The majority of major locations were obstructed by large, dense forests. These forests were so thick that it was easy to get lost in them if you weren't familiar with the land. But my family and I had grown up in these woods and knew them quite well. That's why I decided to travel alone to the funeral, though it quickly became clear this was a mistake. I was on my way there when I got caught in the middle of a terrible and ferocious storm. The storm was so violent that I was completely forced to turn back. The dirt biking trail had become too muddy, so I took to walking beneath the trees, hoping for some extra shelter. By this point, it was night and very dark, so I made sure to linger near the trail where the lampposts were regularly placed. Because of this, I'm certain I hadn't gotten lost, as I mostly followed the trail the whole way back, yet somehow the trail must have diverged into a separate path because I ended up in a part of the woods I didn't recognize. Hoping the darkness had simply made the path seem unfamiliar, I was walking blindly until I was sure I was somewhere I had never been before. This part of the forest was much thicker than I was used to, and I was uncertain of where I was or where the path was leading me. I pressed forward, hoping to come across another town where I could find my way back into the woods I knew. In truth, I didn't want to turn back just yet. I was a little frightened by what had happened, and I was scared I'd even get more lost than I was if I wandered again in a different direction. After a couple of hours of walking, I came across an abandoned cabin deep in the woods. It was large and seemed to be 2 stories tall. I decided to spend the night there, hoping the storm might die down by morning. After collecting some relatively dry wood, I managed to make a small fire in the fireplace. There was indeed an upstairs, but the door at the top of the stairs was locked, and I had little interest in the cabin aside from it being a warm shelter from the storm outside. I made a makeshift bed on the floor using a blanket I had brought with me. Although there was an old couch, I didn't trust it. It could have been diseased or infested with something. I had been asleep for maybe an hour or 2 when I was awoken by a very loud and startling knocking sound. At first, I thought it was coming from the front door, obviously. But when I stood up, I realized it was coming from the door upstairs. The knocking continued for a few moments as I stood by my blanket, staring at the ceiling beneath which the door was located. I wasn't sure what to do, but I worried that someone was up there. Someone who knew I was downstairs, but was too afraid to come down. Still, no one said anything, and eventually the knocking stopped. The storm outside was growing worse, so instead of leaving the cabin, I sat cautiously on my blanket and began writing in my journal. It wasn't long before, despite myself, I fell back asleep. I remember having a troubling dream, though I can't quite recall what it was about. In the middle of the dream, or perhaps near the end of it, I was woken again by the same loud knocking. This time it was even louder. After several forceful knocks, a very distressing scream followed. The scream startled me so bad that I jumped from the blanket and, without thinking, rushed out of the cabin and back into the woods, leaving the blanket behind. After walking for quite some time, I eventually found myself in the town where the funeral was supposed to take place. I spent the rest of the night in a small hotel, and the next morning attended the wake. As I made my way to the open coffin to pay my respects, I noticed the blanket I had left behind, clutched in the hands of my deceased relative.
Our final tale this evening is the story of Mary, who is just trying to sell her picturesque cottage, and along with it, the quiet life. A small cottage nestled at the edge of town sat beneath a rising sun. Just outside the pristine white picket fence stood a sign that read, "Open House." The cobblestone walkway would lead you to a porch that spanned the length of the home. A beautiful, ornate door would greet you with a colorful welcome sign. As you enter, the scent of tea tree oil and lavender would fill your nose and remind you of the gardens that surround this hidden treasure. That was the narrative the realtor had placed just under the words, "The Quiet Life." Mary Sutton quickly tidied the tiny cottage, getting things set up just right for the coming visitors. She had always been particular about the positioning of every piece of furniture. She had always placed a bowl of fruit in the entryway just beside a guest book. Flowers adorned each counter and table, all handpicked from the garden adjacent to the home. She would spend hours making sure everything was just right. And when the first guest would arrive, she stood smiling happily at their arrival. This routine had been repeated on many occasions, but she was always excited, each and every time. She would introduce herself and give a brief history of the property, then guide them through each room, pointing out specifications of the materials used in the constructions. Mary would always part the curtains of each living space, quickly pointing out the scenery outside. She always made a point to play up the large bay window of the dining room. With a sweeping gesture of her hands, she accented the large portrait of wildflowers the window would reveal. She did all this with a smile, but none of her visitors seemed interested in the cottage. They even seemed to be slightly frightened by it, which confused Mary. After hours of little luck, Mary sat down upon the front steps in a huff. Her last visitor of the day had left so abruptly, she had not had a chance to show them the garden. In her defeat, she slowly rose from her seat, closing the door behind her. She lifted the bowl of fruit that had started to bruise and collected the guest book that had a dozen or so names. She would leave the flowers for tomorrow because they had begun to wilt anyway. Mary made her way to the kitchen, her hand brushing the switch. It flickered to life as she tossed out the apples and oranges. The light faded again as she exited, without her even touching the switch. But she did not even notice. "I'm starting to think I will never get anyone to stay here," she whispered to herself before walking down the hallway, still clutching the guest book. The sun now set on the tiny cottage, and the air grew colder. But it was something she had become accustomed to. Mary did not feel the cold anymore, only loneliness. That was the feeling that haunted her nights, her mind filled with faces that never remained with her, the lights dimming in each room as she passed it. Each curtain drew across the window when her hand reached for them. The routine had become like a record on repeat. Mary sometimes had trouble remembering how long she had been doing this. opening doors and curtains only to shut them again. She stopped to admire the garden one more time before pulling the last of them over the bay window. The old wooden rocking chair squeaked to life as she brushed by it, but she was too deep in thought to let it bother her. Mary completed her rounds and decided to retire for the night. Her form passed through the doorway that led to the basement like smoke. She never even touched the handle. "It's so lonely here," she said with sadness in her voice. "I have to try harder next time." Thank you so much for joining me this evening for the 6th edition of the Campfire Sessions, here on Tapes of Trepidation. I hope you had as much fun as I did sitting around the campfire while these stories were shared. The stories featured on this edition were Head on the Mirror, which was written by Adam Carl Castillo, and it was originally posted on the Creepypasta Wiki. A Strange Event, which was written by EtherBot. It was originally posted on the Creepypasta Wiki. On a quick side note, EtherBot has a lot of great stuff on the wiki, so if you like this story, be sure to give them a search on the Creepypasta Wiki. Guest narration for this story was by Loggerhead. You can find a link to his social media in the show notes. The Quiet Life was written by Locked334, and it was originally posted on the Creepypasta Wiki. The Tapes of Trepidation theme and the wonderful acoustic version you're currently hearing was written and performed by JM Scherf. If you need any custom or stock music, JM is the man and is awesome to work with. You'll find a link to all his content in the show notes. All logos, banners, overlays, including the brand new Campfire Sessions overlay, were done by the incredible Jason Rees from Jaybird Digital Arts. If you need any kind of graphic design work done, Jason is your guy. You'll find a link to contact him in the show notes. If you enjoyed what you heard, consider subscribing, leaving a rating, and following Tapes of Trepidation on social media. You can find our link tree in the show notes. And we normally do things a little differently here on Tapes of Trepidation. So if you're joining us for the first time for the Campfire Sessions, I implore you to go check out the nearly 70 official episodes of Tapes of Trepidation, as well as some fun other little detours like the Campfire Sessions. Normally on the show, there's unique music and even some sound design. These Campfire Sessions are just a fun little detour through the woods. And if you feel like supporting the show a little more, consider joining the Tapes of Trepidation Patreon, where for as little as $5 a month, you can gain access to monthly bonus short story narrations, the weekly behind-the-scenes podcast within the archive, a weekly shout-out, and more at higher tiers. So come, join us, and become trapped within the archive. Just like my current patrons, Doozer Pin Dan, Ronan Kumori, Eric Phones, Patrick Stewart, Madam Strangeways, Dr. Torment, Tori, and Queen Cam. Thank you all so much for the support. I couldn't do this without you guys. All content used on Tapes of Trepidation is either original, used with permission, or is available under a Creative Commons by Share-alike license. Licensing information can be found in the show notes. Now, I think it's best if you head out for the night, as the fire is starting to die out, and you never know what may be lurking nearby in the dark. Hope to see you next time.